I was straddling two jobs for a long time before I finally was like, okay, I just do podcasting. That's what I do. And it is, that is what I do for a living. There's these other things that have spun off from it, like writing and doing the voice acting stuff. I've been very fortunate that most of my shows are with members of my family. I don't get tired of talking to them. Like, I just love doing it. I'd have those conversations, you know, even if we weren't recording them.
Hello and welcome back to the Record Edit podcast. I'm Bradley Denham and today I'm talking to Justin McElroy. He is a 3 times best-selling author of the Adventure Zone graphic novels and the co-host of the Adventure Zone podcast. He also hosts many other shows like My Brother, and Me, which became a TV adaptation for NBC Universal, and Sawbones, which was also adapted into a New York Times best-selling book. And that's only scratching the surface. He's also a TEDx speaker, one of the voice actors in the recent award-winning film Trolls World Tour, and he recently published a podcasting how-to book, Everybody Has a Podcast Except You. Justin, you are prolific.
Yeah. Too much so, if you ask the internet. Hi, thanks for having me.
So you've accomplished so much inside and outside the world of podcasting. I want to take it back to the very, very beginning. Like, what were you doing before you were hosting a dozen different podcasts, writing best-selling books, TV shows, movies, and why should people start podcasts in the first place?
I started podcasting in 2008. So my dad had been in radio for a lot of years since I was born. So we got exposed to that world somewhat. We would do like ad reads, you know what I mean? Like, find what you need at Buchanan Auto Mall, you know, when they needed a kid voice. But like, I'd never really, I mean, it wasn't like a career path, or it probably would have occurred to me earlier that it's like something that I should look into doing. So I had like a lot of different, I mean, I worked at 5 different places at the mall, you know what I mean? Like, I had a ton of different jobs, and I actually started like my first like actual career was journalism. So I was like writing general news stuff for a few years and editing and stuff. And then, got into video game journalism, in like 2007, for a site called Joystick. And I'd been doing some freelance stuff before that, but that was like my first main thing. But that's where I started podcasting. That a Joystick podcast that was 10 episodes in when I joined. So it was like a late addition to the show. But I volunteered to handle the editing and posting if they let me stay on it. So I got my foot in the door there, and that was really the start. That was like mid 2008. And then from that, we started like building out that audience, and I've just sort of like continued to try to build audiences based on like that initial. I think we had like 5,000 people in the Facebook group for Joystick Podcast, and that like my brothers and I did My Brother and Me. We started that in 2010, April 2010, and kind of like used that audience as like the starting point for the My Brother and Me audience. So they came over, and that was how it got started, like very pretty early. I've seen it, like, I mean, it was a lot easier then because there were so many fewer podcasts, right? I joke in the book, there's like 8 podcasts. So like, you didn't have a lot of choice. You had to listen to me, or nothing. Those are your options. So
yeah, man, over a decade of podcasting. That's just wild.
Yeah.
Because it feels like just now in the past, probably like 3 to 5 years, that the industry is like just now started to take off.
It's like such a weird beast because it kind of ebbs and flows, and like the people who are in the space, who have been in it, like it seems like the most natural, obvious part of your life, right? It's like, oh yeah, podcasting, everybody. And then you read studies, like I was on a show last night where we were talking about like 80% of people are, or sorry, 78% of people are in America are familiar with the term podcasting. Like they've heard the word. That means there's 22% of adults in America who are like, what? A pod,
Yeah.
huh? Like, that's wild. There's no other media. Like, That's not a thing. Like, and I mean, you're seeing that. I mean, you'll see this process repeated a bajillion times as technology continues to evolve. Like, I'm sure the numbers of awareness of like TikTok, for example, are like even lower and will continue to grow. But like, keep seeing these pushes where like it'll chip away into that audience. Like your serials is a good example of like bringing in a bunch of people who weren't podcast listeners before. And when you get like celebrities, doing their podcasts, like what Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen are doing a podcast now, I'm supposed to compete with that. But like, I think that's really the battle, I think is bringing people into the ecosystem and making it easier for them to do that.
I forget the exact statistics. I think it might've been Infinite Dial, but it's like, we just cracked 1 million shows on Apple Podcasts, but I forget, it's like a third of them are only active, like only a third are still active. I forget the exact stats.
Yeah, I think a lot of people try it and they kind of bail on it, which I like. I mean, whatever. Some of those inactive podcasts are mine. I get it. It's like you try something, you do it, and not everything has to be permanent. Some things can just be you have your fun and then you move on.
I'm sure you could think of 100 different things, but what would you say has been the most meaningful achievement to you in that decade plus of podcasting?
I don't think that it's one thing, but I will narrow it down to when we started being able to like tour consistently and play like 2,000 or 3,000 seat venues and fill them up with people. Like that to me really felt like, because a lot of podcasting can feel very much in a vacuum. Like it can feel sort of ephemeral, like I'm talking into a microphone and pressing play and sending it out in the world, but like who knows if anybody's hearing it. And I think being able to perform in front of people and like get that energy back while you're actually doing the show and meeting people and them telling you like what your show's meant to them or the influence that you have had is tremendously gratifying. And I think that that's probably being able to do that and meeting fans and that kind of thing is probably the thing I'm proudest of.
Could we dig deeper on that? Because like, what is it? It's 2021. You've been podcasting since 2008. That's what, 17 years?
13, I think. 13, yeah.
Terrible at math, but it's
Quite
like
right.
that's a long time to keep going. Like what exactly has kept you going this long?
I have no other marketable skills, Bradley. I mean, that's it. I podcast. I was straddling like two jobs for a long time. I mean, it was like 2018 before I stopped doing like games journalism as a side thing. Like it was a long time before I finally was like, okay, I just do podcasting. That's what I do. And it is that is what I do for a living. There's these other things that have spun off from it, like writing and doing the voice acting stuff. But like, I just really like doing it. It's like, I like talking to people. I like, I've been very fortunate that pretty much most of my shows are with members of my family. I don't get tired of talking to them. Like Sawbones' show I do with my wife, Dr. Sydney McElroy, and I just love doing it. I'd have those conversations, even if we weren't recording them. And I think that to me is I know there are people for whom their podcasts, like people with really successful podcasts who the podcast feels like work, right? Like I'm sure freaking hardcore history, like that's exhausting to put together, right? Or like I know like things like 99% Invisible are like exhaustively researched and are probably a pain in the butt. I could never like sustain a show like that. I like doing it because it's just like conversational and doesn't feel like work to me. It feels like I get paid to talk to people I really enjoy. So I mean, why do anything else?
Let's talk about Adventure Zone, because listening to it and like having the production background, that definitely sounds like work, because there's just so many.
The secret to that is I never actually run the show. I don't DM the shows. So my brothers Travis and Griffin have both done it, and actually my dad did an arc. But like, I don't take that on. I don't want to do that. It's a lot. I just play Dungeons and Dragons for an hour and a half and call it a day. So no, it is not hard for me. I get the real easy job on those.
I'm sure you still understand, or like you still know how it's produced soup to nuts, and I'm really, maybe we should have had your brothers on too, but I'm just really curious to break this down because the episodes are pretty long. There's a lot of characters, a lot of moving parts, music, voice acting. Do you guys script the show, or is it purely improv? It sounds like on your part it's just improv.
No, it's purely. I mean, usually whoever is running the game, there's definitely scripted sequences that are not back and forth, right? But they'll script out like an important like description of something that happens, right? Or like an introduction or an outro duction, which is not a word, which is weird. Outro, they'll script or they'll script like things that don't involve us, the other players. But no, the rest of it is like purely improv. I mean, very few times, you know, and I think this is a result of playing like a game as a storytelling mechanism, is like there'll be times when we are just absolutely in the weeds and no one really understands what they're doing. And we have to like kind of stop and be like, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? And a lot of times we'll leave the mics on when we're doing that. Sometimes it's like, you got to keep it like listenable. So if it gets too into like the nitty gritty, you know, we will sometimes like, leave that on the cutting room floor. But yeah, it's a huge lift, but we leave in most of it because it is still like it's us playing a game, right? So like the mechanics are there, the roles are there, stuff like that. So, and also with a show like that where it's not scripted, and this is true of my brother and me to a certain extent too, it becomes harder to pluck out like one thing that doesn't work, right? Or because you might refer to it again in 45 minutes, right? The flow is not scripted. The flow is like completely from your own mind. So like if you remove a chunk of it, you may not remember why you did that in the first place, or, you know, things very quickly can fall apart. Yeah, not a ton of editing, you know, some general tightening, but you gotta be real careful about what stuff you decide to cut out.
What all do you guys use to record the show? Because it's four people, right? So you, your brothers, and your dad?
Yeah. So we've had many different permutations in terms of like gear. You know, we started with like Chromie USB Rock Band microphones that we just like plugged into the computer and recorded with. Yeah.
Oh my God, the garage sale special.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just like, what do you have on hand? What is within reach? But now we have switched to, we all use different mixers. I think my dad and I both use Roadcasters, just because it makes, when I'm recording like locally with my wife, I need something with a little bit more, you know, control. I think at this point, me, Dad, and Travis all use CAD E100Ss. I think my brother Griffin is actually using a Shure SM58, which I give him no small amount of hard time about. It's a great microphone. It's a great like like when you do live shows as often as we do, like 90% of the time they're using a Shure SM58. It's $100. You can toss it down a flight of stairs, and you know, very consistent, very dependable. And I've used one in the past. Like I have one because I think it's a great like place to start. But he sounds slightly different from us, and that irritates me. But it's indiscernible unless you're really listening. So. But that is the main thing that we that is the technically speaking, and I've used these DT770 Pro. I used to have a pair of Master and Dynamic headphones that were gorgeous, but are a little less comfortable. And when you wear headphones for as much of your life as I do, they need the pillowy softness and sweat absorption.
Those Bayer Dynamics are so comfortable.
The leather, though, they've got like leather on the cups. So like when I'm wearing them for an extended period of time, there's like a sweat issue that these have like a wicking that I really appreciate. I haven't smelled my headphones. I bet it's bad. Like I bet it's not good. But that's a hazard to the job, I suppose.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you mentioned that you guys don't really edit the show that much, but I imagine that there's still a degree of editing that does occur. So I'm curious to know, what kind of program do you use? What's your guys' like workflow, and do you have any tips or tricks?
So we have an editor name that we work with now named Rachel Jacobs, who's been like an absolute godsend. But we actually did not work with an editor at all for anything until, I mean, it's probably been maybe 4 or 5 months. Who knows with time anymore, right? But like it's around 4 or 5 months when Rachel came on, and before that, we were editing everything ourselves
Mm,
all the time, mainly because we like it was like a especially with comedy, it's like we didn't trust other people's instincts. You know what I mean? We trusted our own instincts. We had to find like the perfect person to do it and stop being so precious about it. But so that being said, I swear by Reaper is the
okay.
thing that I use for pretty much everything. It has a lot of flexibility. It's got really good support, online, a lot of tutorials and stuff like that. Um, and I really like building out my own FX chain that I can just apply to whatever that I know works for me and I know is a good fit for that. I think I started using it because there's a guy, Mike Delgadio, who does a channel called Booth Junkie. This is like more VO focused, but like
Mm,
tons of microphone reviews, workflows, and setup. And like I basically just copied and pasted like his entire like setup in Reaper. Something I think you struggle with pretty much every DAW is it when you're doing podcasting is like so much of them are built for music or like had to have that flexibility, right? And what was nice is following his guides, I was able to like basically take out all music stuff, right? So it's just the tools that I actually use. We've experimented with others. I have used one called Hindenburg from time to time. That's more aimed at radio journalism. So if you're like pulling together a lot of disparate audio sources, that would be great. I don't end up doing that a lot. Um, but Griffin, my youngest brother, who edited the Adventure Zone for the longest time, he uses Audacity and has for 10 years, and we still give him
wow.
crap about it, but he swears by it. I had it crash on me one too many times, and I had to let it go, and I can't return to it. It's also extremely ugly, but he loves Audacity. And I think it is I think it's very cool that there's like such a powerful free tool that is so widely supported. I prefer Reaper at this point.
Have you guys checked out Descript? Might be really useful for what you're doing.
You know what? I checked it out a long time ago when it was in like very early stages, and I have not returned to it. I think it might be worth. It's been like a year or so, so I
Yeah.
might want to check back in on it and see how it's coming along.
Definitely. I was like one of the early adopters too. I tried it for like 2 months and I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. And it's missing so many features. It's like, oh, this sucks. And then like 6 months later, I see like this massive update and we use it's like an integral part of our workflows now.
Hmm.
Not so much for like the actual editing, but for quickly sifting through tons and tons of content. Because like you can remember like that one thing that you said that you want to remove, but you might
Mhm.
not remember exactly like where it's at. But you can just search it like a normal like Google Doc.
That's so cool.
Okay, we've crafted the story, the narrative, we've recorded it, we've edited it. So what do you do to promote an Adventure Zone episode?
The things that we do are not going to be useful to most people because we've been fortunate enough to build a pretty large audience that has, shares the show organically at this point. But that idea of asking the audience to help you grow the show has been our basically only means of promotion since we started. We some of the we tried to get really creative early when when the audiences were a lot smaller than they are now. One thing we did was listening parties where if you could get 4 or more people together to listen to my brother and me, and you would tell us who is going to be there at the listening party, we would record a personalized intro for your listening party.
Oh,
Um, So like it would be like, so hey, hello to blah 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 blah. We hope you enjoy the show. Here it is. And like people could play that for their friends and it was an incentive. And all they had to do was like send us a picture of everybody like listening to it afterwards to prove that they actually did it. And that was something we had a lot of success with early on because it really helped to engender that spirit of like it making it a fun thing to do with other people. But like instilling that sense in people that like you really need them to help you spread the word because they are the only ones that can do it. I feel like that's tougher even now than it was 10 years ago when we started because there's so many. Everyone has realized this. This is not a secret at this point, right? Like you can spend money on advertising, but most podcasts are so niche that like it's gonna be tough to target. Like the people I want to target with my brother me ads are like the people who already listen to my brother. It's like such a narrow, so we have not done a lot of like advertising. Every once in a while, if we have like a big guest or something that we think people might be interested in hearing more on, I think we've promoted those. Or like if there's a new Adventure Zone arc starting, we will sometimes do like a paid Facebook promotion for that, where it's like telling people like, hey, if you've heard about this maybe, but you're not following it, like here is a good jumping on point. But the other stuff that like we have, a lot of it has changed over the years. Like when we started, we had a Facebook group for each of the shows that we were very involved in. And that got, that was huge at first because it was like really helped to instill a sense of community. It was great, like having that connection with listeners. You had that direct feedback on each episode, and I think that really helped us to build an audience early on. It got to a point though, a few years ago where there were enough people in the groups, and there was enough like, and just like any other internet group, there is I was gonna say Discord, but that actual Discord and not like Discord. That there would be like fights or arguments or whatever, scandal, controversy, whatever it is, and then people would know that we were in the group, right? So somebody would want to say something negative about one of the shows, and then because I think in part because people knew we were in the group, there would be people who would like get extremely defensive and make like a bad scene. And we eventually felt like our presence in those groups was like making them more contentious. And it started to feel weird. The sort of power imbalance, I guess you'd say, of like the people who created the thing being in the group of people discussing the thing. So we've stepped back a lot from that, like those feedback loops, and like not reading things like Reddit or whatever, just because like, I don't know, sometimes people want to complain about the thing you made. And like, that is not always like a great energy to willingly sort of absorb. Right. But those were some of like the big things that we did. If I was starting now, some of the things that we recommend to people is like, but I think the number one mistake podcasters make is this: trying to build an audience with one episode that you've made. And like, it seems obvious, right? Because you make something and you're proud of it and you want people to listen to it, right? But I feel like the problems with that are, one, if you start that push after you don't know what your show is when you make the first episode. Like, you don't know what that show is going to be unless you've like been doing it a long time. Like, I feel like at this point in my career, if I make a podcast, like I know what the podcast is going to be because I have polished those instincts enough. But like, especially if you've been doing it as long as I have, which is pretty much everybody, you're not going to know what the show is when you start. It is going to get better the longer you do it. And if you start promoting it like, hey, I've gotten so many like requests from people who are like, please let me know what you think of my podcast. It's their first episode. You don't want me to listen to your first episode. I don't want people to listen to the first episode of any podcast I've ever done. No, stop. Don't do it. Like, wait until you have. And also the other problem with it is if people like it, they're like, oh, that was good. There's one episode.
Yeah.
that may not become a habit, right? It may not become something they want to return to over and over and over again. If there's 10 episodes, then it's like, okay, I've really made this a part of my life now. I'm invested. I've listened to a lot of one episodes of podcasts and been like, oh, okay, good. But that's it. And I forget about it. I don't return to it. Some of the, like, my deepest connections to some podcasts are podcasts that I came to years in, like The Worst Idea of All Time and The Flop House and shows like that. Reply All is another one where, like, I didn't start listening until years in, and there was so much to go back into that by the time I was caught back up, I was like in, you know what I mean? No matter what. So like that would be the other thing. The other thing I'd say is when you're starting your podcast, make your episodes as short as humanly possible. Like make them as short as you can make them and still have the show that you want to make. Because this is my dumb theory, but I think it holds water. If someone does not finish the episode, the first episode you made, they will never listen to it again. If it's short, so short, in fact, that it ends and they're still listening, they're on some level, they're going to think, I must have liked that. I listened to the whole thing. Maybe I'll listen to another one. You know, like it was short enough where like you got in, you did what you wanted to do, you get out. My brother and me was about 35 minutes when we started. And gradually over time, it extended to the approximate hour that it is now. And that felt right. And we've kept it there for, many years. But like we didn't start that way because like, I think concision is really important when you're starting out because I feel like anything else is kind of assuming too much of the listener, like just assuming they're going to be so enraptured with you that they want to spend an hour and a half in your presence
after one episode.
Yeah, and I think that's something you can really work on as the longer you go. It's a great strength to be able to make your show without worrying about growing it. At first, like for some period of time, like to make your show and really feel like this is the show that I wanted to make and I've gotten there and I've figured it out by doing it enough times.
Man, there was so much there that I want to unpack. Like the biggest thing for me out of that was it's a performance art. Like when you're hosting a show, it is a performance and it takes practice and it takes repetition. And yeah, if you put out one episode, you don't even know what you're talking about, who you're talking to.
If you have a co-host, the rhythms, you know what I mean, that you develop, like that's one area where my brothers and I were really lucky because growing up together, like we had honed those rhythms. We knew each other, right? If you're making a show with someone that you didn't grow up with in the same house, like I think it takes time to figure out like when is that person about done with their sentence and I need to start getting ready to jump in to do something. When are they, when do they have something to say? I can sense it. Like, and I don't think that happens with episode one.
How's your dad's background in radio influenced your podcasting chops?
I think he brought a real sense of like, he's great. Like he was somebody who came into it like already great with voices, great with timing. Like he knew that stuff. I think that also we watched Dad. We would watch Dad go to like remotes where they would broadcast from the car dealership. You know what I mean? Like set up a tower and they'd be at friggin' Arby's or something. And it's like, we're doing the show live from Arby's. But the phenomenon that we saw at every one of these is that listeners would come up to him and treat him like a friend. And he would answer in kind. Like he would have that, and he didn't know their names, but they knew him because like audio is a very intimate medium. Like if it's somebody who's like with you on your drive to work every single day, you feel like they're a friend. And I think you see that with podcasts too. And seeing how Dad like really treated people who listened to his stuff with like respect and familiarity and warmth, I think really informed how we interacted with our audience, and still do to this day, because you could tell like he really valued them, and I think that that's something that had a huge impact on us.
That's the part that a lot of people miss is I think the psychological term for it is parasocial relationship, which is basically like a one-sided relationship that's developed through primarily media. And so many hosts are so impersonal about it. Like they call their listeners like listeners or their audience instead of just like you or friend or like one single person, because most times one person is listening to the show. You're not talking to a group of people. You're talking to one person at a time.
It's true.
A million times over.
I think it's important. We say this in the book, but like, I think it's really important when you're recording at any point, especially if it's like by yourself or when you're making it, even making with other people, that you have someone in your head that you are talking to, right? Like, who are you trying to? I know with my brother and me, like, I'm trying to make my brothers laugh. Like, I know that's what's in my head, right? I'm trying to make them laugh. When I'm doing a show by myself, though, like, I'm a lot of times I'm thinking about like my wife, like how I would be talking to her if I was doing this show. Like, that was my audience. My dad is actually the one that taught me that too. Because he used to do, morning radio, and he said he would always pretend he was talking to mom. Like, and that warmth comes through. Like, it's a real thing.
Well, let's talk about the book. Let's dive into why you wanted to write it in the first place and like your goals with it.
We didn't write this because we thought it would make us rich. Like, we didn't think like this is the book that America's been waiting for. I read several books about podcasting that were not good, and a lot of them were written by people who don't have successful podcasts. So like, why am I listening? Why am I listening to you? You don't know, you may not know what you're talking. I don't know if you know what you're talking about or not. So that was part of it. And part of it is like, I answered so many emails from people who are just like, and it was like friends or just like strangers or whatever, who are like, I ended up getting the same advice over and over and over and over and over again. And eventually got to this point where it's like, let's just put this in a book so we can get it out. And it's like, we have something where it's like, here's how we do it. I don't know. A lot of it's probably wrong because we have been DIY our entire careers, right? So it's just like like when it comes to like tech, it's just like, I don't know. I Googled best microphones under $50 and I bought the one that the reviews say. Like, you can't overthink that stuff. So like, but we wanted to get it all on paper. We wanted to get it all out. And like, it's the interesting part about writing it is you realize like how little you actually have either like don't know or have been doing with instinct. Like, and there's a lot of podcasts that are very popular, as I alluded to earlier, that like, I don't know how to make a deeply researched, heavily edited. I don't know how to do that. It sounds really hard. I don't know how to do it. And like, we had to be really honest in the book. Like, listen, if you want to make those shows, we cannot help you. We can give you some basics, but like that, but I don't know how to do it. So that was the main idea, is like, just like to get it all out on paper. So we had like something to point to. It's like, this is how we do it. And it was actually ended up being very informative of our own process. Like, cause you really had to critically examine everything you do. And like, if you're going to tell other people to do it,
yeah,
is this just a bad habit you've had for a decade, or is it something that actually has a rationale behind it? And a lot of it we've like was also not wanting people to fall into the same like potholes that we did. Like, there's a lot of like, mistakes and things that we messed up that we could like save people from.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Let's dive into what were some of the biggest pitfalls and mistakes when you first started out. Like, what should we be looking out for?
I mean, I think lack of consistency is like probably the biggest sort of bummer that you can have. A lot of the shows that, a few of the shows that I've had where I have seen audience decline or just never really grow is when it is not coming out on a regular schedule and it's not like a consistent product that people can rely on. And I think that more than any other medium, I think that consistency is so essential with podcasts, right? I only listen to one gaming podcast at this point in my life. It's a Giant Bombcast, right? It comes out on Tuesdays. Every Wednesday night, I take the trash out, and it takes that is it. I'm going to start the episode then when I go to take the trash out, and I do it every week. And like, I have a couple of other shows like that. They're like, I know when the new one's up, this is the thing that I'm doing while I'm listening to this. It better be there. And like, all credit to those cats. Like, they don't miss a week. Like, they don't just not have one no matter what. So that is something that I have, I have observed is hugely dangerous. And I've also like consistency within the show. Like I had a show called Quality Control that was about gaming that um it when I started it, it was just me. And then me and another guy named Charlie Hall, who's hugely talented, has the best voice in the world. We would alternate, right? Alternate weeks. And that show struggled because not because I was bad or Charlie was bad, but because like the back and forth, people didn't know what they were going to get week in and week out. Sometimes I'd be out of town and Charlie would do two of them, like whatever. And it's like that consistency, I think, is so important to people. Like they want to know what they're getting. They want to know when they're getting it. And that can get, if you do it for a long, 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 long time, like my brother, me, or Taz, that can get a little claustrophobic from time to time. So you have to keep yourself invested. But I don't think you want to push it so far that people are like, I don't know what I'm getting out of this anymore. So I think any occasional like shake up is fine, but I think that it has to be clear that that's what it is versus just like, I don't know, we're doing new stuff every week. And there are shows, don't get me wrong, but like I know have had success with that, but I think they're at least consistent in their inconsistency.
How have your problems changed as you've grown? Like, is there anything now that you know that you could be doing better that maybe you don't have the time for, or maybe someone listening might be able to help you with?
I think as the shows have gotten bigger, I think the thing that we probably struggle with the most is responsibility, meaning what like good can we do in the world with like the platform that we have? And that's something where like some of it is like, I don't know how you fix it. Like our shows aren't diverse enough. Like our family shows aren't diverse enough because our family isn't diverse because we're family. You know what I mean? Like that is one thing that's like that we've definitely struggled with. And like, I don't know, we've attempted to address with like more guests and stuff like that, like getting more LGBTQ folks and people of color in as guests to try to like help elevate those voices and try to broaden our own like audience and our own perspective. But like also like charitable giving and trying to direct listeners towards charity. Like we focus on that a lot, and it's tough knowing, especially when you're like, it's a family business that we all rely on for our income. It's tough to figure out like how much of that should be charitable work and how much of it like just is stuff you need to pay the bills. Like, but we've been really lucky that our listeners are really supportive and they've let us like we have like an annual charity show called Candle Nights that was streaming this year and was amazing, that let us donate a huge chunk of money to people who are experiencing homelessness in our area. And we do like a lot of merch is for charity. And that helps, but like, it's always a struggle to find that balance. I think also like we struggle with trying to keep the format interesting. Like what I kind of just alluded to, like keep the format interesting and fresh and, but still make it something that people would want to listen to and would enjoy, because a lot of things this is like different from consistency, is like doing something that you think will be creatively energizing, and people may not dig it at first, but I've seen this phenomena of people like eventually coming around and really liking a new aspect of your show. But like you have to have the guts to keep doing it until you figure out if people don't like it because it's new or people don't like it because it's bad. Which you can expand that to all podcasts in general. I think is like, is this maybe just like people don't like this podcast and I maybe need to do something different?
It makes me so happy to hear that you're taking podcasting to a higher level and trying to figure out ways to support and give back to your communities.
And it's never enough. Like we're always trying to find other stuff that we can do. And like how much of, I feel like a lot of people get into podcasts because they want to do other stuff. Like, because a podcast is like pretty low lift in terms of what you need to actually get started doing it. It's a lot easier to make a podcast than it is to make a TV show. You know what I mean? Like in your house, like, and so I think that is something where we try to balance those things. Like when we get really excited about an idea that isn't a podcast. Like, how do we pursue that and do it and like make it worthwhile, but also like not forget about the podcasts that are sort of like the foundation of our whole thing. So finding that balance, it can be tough.
I always like to end every episode by asking, who's your moonshot guest and why? Like, who would you love to have on the show?
God, it's hard because we had Lin-Manuel Miranda and we had Jimmy Buffett. So like those are, I don't know. It's tough because like I'll be honest with you, Radley. What's hard about it is I don't necessarily like. I feel like we have a big enough show that we could use it to like bring in bigger guests, but we've experimented with that and it doesn't make for the best show a lot of the time. You know what I mean? Like I really want it to be like, and you don't know that until you're sitting around a microphone and like doing it. So that makes it really tough because I don't just want to pick somebody who like I want to talk to for some period of time. It has to be somebody who like really would serve the show. You'd think I would think about this more frequently, right? You think I would like consider it a little bit more. Hold on. Now I'm actually going to come up with something. Hold on. Let me think.
Take your time.
No, I am. I'm going to take my time because I'm going to come up with a really good answer. Lady Gaga. I think that Lady Gaga, you ever have people who you like, I think she'd get it. Like, I feel like Lady Gaga would get it. And I feel like if we could get Lady Gaga, just sit down and hang out, I feel like Lady Gaga would get it. I feel like that would be a fun conversation.
What?
You said moonshot.
Why Lady Gaga?
Because I feel like Lady Gaga
she would get it.
I feel like she has a willingness to. I really respect her willingness to like do whatever interests her creatively, and not necessarily like, and just trust that people will follow the instincts, like that will follow her creative instincts and creative impulses. And she seems to have like not a lot of caring for if people don't necessarily get it. And I very much respect that. I think that's very cool. So I would love to have Lady Gaga on the podcast. And also you said moonshot, so I want to pick somebody that I'm fairly certain we could not book in a million years. So that is the other one that I have actually kicked around with my brothers is like, I would think it would be very funny to get Doug Imhoff on the show because there's the idea that somebody is the first, second gentleman is just so relatable to me that I feel like I could really groove on that. Cause it's like, I don't know what you're doing. I'm sure he's doing a lot of stuff, but it's like the idea that the thing that you rose to prominence with is like being the first, second gentleman. I just think that that's so funny. And I feel like we could, I would love to get Doug Imhoff on the show. Cause like, I'm just curious what that cat's day to day is like.
Oh my gosh. That'd be so cool. All right. Thanks for joining us, Justin. Where can people check out your podcasts and find you online?
McElroy.family, MCELROY.family. Pretty much everything's there. You can also search YouTube if you want to get a sample. Search YouTube for MBMBAM. And there's a lot of listeners who've made like animatics and stuff like that are very funny and they've done a great job with. So that's a good place to get like an idea of the stuff that we do.